Welcome to Emerging Civil War News. I'm Chris Mackowski, and joining me today is my friend Kevin Levin. Kevin, how are you today?
Doing great, Chris. Great to be with you.
It's great to have you with us. And just this past weekend, you had organized a rally in Gettysburg, holding the high ground. It was held on Monday. And tell me, how did your rally go?
It went better than I could ever have expected, Chris. At first, I just wanted to find a way, since I'm in Gettysburg right now, to just find a way to support the National Park Service. So I imagined myself standing on Gettysburg ground with a sign, and before I knew it, I contacted a local organization. They helped me with the permits. I got the word out, and we had about 65 people show up yesterday. The weather wasn't great, but I thought it went really well. It was just the camaraderie, just the sense that you're not alone, that this is a shared issue. I could not have been more pleased.
Now, the rally was held near the Eternal Peace Light Memorial, very
Yep.
symbolic place. How did that kind of help add to the atmosphere?
We really didn't talk much about history. Certainly, I was aware of it, given the significance of the reunion that took place there, given Roosevelt's presence on the eve of World War II. And so it was just, I would say it was in the background. We recited the Gettysburg Address at the end of our rally, so that was certainly on our minds, and so it was all sort of part of it. So it was kind of a nice blend of the current concern, where we are right now, and what took place on the Gettysburg battlefield, as we all know.
What was the mood of the crowd, of the folks who were there with you?
Incredibly positive. We had people. A number of people are here for the uh, the annual conference at Gettysburg College, put on by the Civil War Institute. So there were a number of people who came over from after their day-long tours to rally with us, and then a number of people, in and around Gettysburg who have been. This is not the first rally that's been organized in support of the National Park Service in Gettysburg, so it is an important issue to local people. And so it was incredibly positive. We just, again, the sense of community was just really strong, and I think everyone got something out of it.
Now, you had brought this issue to light as soon as, political events started, kind of honing in on the Park Service. Tell me a little bit about your own personal concern about what's going on with the Park Service.
Let me just say, Chris, that the spark for me, the spark that has led to 30 years plus of teaching the Civil War, writing about the Civil War, leading groups to Civil War sites, started with a chance visit to Antietam National Battlefield back in 1995. I knew nothing about the Civil War, and I ended up on a tour with historian Ted Alexander from Antietam. I think many of your viewers, listeners remember Ted. And that was the spark. And I kept going back to Antietam in the months that followed. And it was Ted and the National Park Service that gave me my first chance at doing a little bit of research at the battlefield. I was fascinated with the civilian experience in and around Sharpsburg during the battle. And ever since then, we go to battlefields, National Park Service sites, to deepen our understanding of the history. I go to have my views, my assumptions about the past challenged by National Park Service historians and rangers. And so over the last 30 years, they've become essentially my teachers. I continue to learn from them and to see what is happening right now. The sort of intimidation, the demonization of National Park Service staff, especially in recent months with this ridiculous attempt at intimidating the Park Service through these QR codes that are now going up at Park Service sites, where you can complain if you see something that you deem to be unpatriotic or un-American. This has nothing to do with history, and our Park Service people, our friends, deserve so much better. And so this was the least that I can do. I could not imagine coming to Gettysburg this summer without doing something that demonstrated my support for my friends, my teachers.
Yeah, to me, it seems like, specifically with those QR codes that, that's a reaction against, getting the sort of history that people want to have versus kind of the continuing evolution that history always undergoes as we understand it better and find more resources and more
Absolutely.
references.
Absolutely, Chris. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's just another blatant attempt, clear attempt to divide us as a country. And I am convinced that this is a bipartisan issue. I think this is an issue that can bring Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives together. We all visit and cherish our National Park Service sites. And I think many of us operate under the belief that these places will always be available to us. That, we were brought there as children by our parents, we bring our own kids, and we assume that our kids at some point in the future, hopefully, will bring their children to these sacred spaces. And that's just not the case. I think that's what we're seeing right now. And that's why I think we really do need to pay attention, call our congressmen and women, and stand up for really the best, one of the most important and agencies in the federal government.
Yeah, they are national treasures.
They're
There's a reason why they are national, right? Um,
absolutely.
Help me make that distinction between the parks and the Park Service, because I have heard criticism like, yeah, the Park Service needs to be reformed. There's bureaucracy, blah blah blah. It certainly has its critics, as any institution does, but that's kind of, I think, a different issue than preserving these spaces and resources.
Yeah, I can see where people are sort of struggling with this issue because on the one hand, I think there are a lot of Americans when they think of national parks, perhaps they think of places like Yosemite and other sort of places where it's really the focus is on nature, right? Um, and when it comes to historic sites like Independence Hall or the home of Ulysses S. Grant or what have you, that we see them as somehow separate. They are more historical sites than sites of nature. And yet, I think that these categories overlap in so many ways. I think for a place like Gettysburg, you know, all of us know that you visit Gettysburg and you see people, of course, deeply engaged in the history, and you also see people just appreciating the nature. And obviously, this creates certain problems. Think of the ongoing issue with the lake or pond. I'm not quite sure what they're referring to it as these
That
days.
that beaver habitat.
That's right, the base of Little Round Top. And look, I think that all of this we need to consider together, right? As these are our National Park Service sites, and all of these places combine a love of nature or a need to preserve nature and to interpret and protect our history. I think we have to understand them as a sort of a cohesive whole. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's
Yeah.
yeah, and I think too that from maybe a political perspective, if people look at an agency, any agency, and kind of think of the bureaucracy that surrounds it, but to me, that's a different issue than just kind of being able to enjoy the resources, whether they be historical or natural or cultural or
Yeah,
whatever.
and I think, look, I think most people understand that the Park Service, especially the interpretation side of the National Park Service, that has always been politicized, right? Our history in recent decades, I think, even beyond the Park Service, has been politicized. That said, and I think Republicans and Democrats both have tried to steer the ship in different directions, and I think that's inevitable. But I think what we've seen over the last few months is just something entirely different in terms of the level of accusation, the sort of of targeting against the Park Service, this executive order of restoring sanity to American history. To me, and I think a lot of people will agree, it just doesn't seem to have anything to do with history. I think at least if you poll people who visit these sites, that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that the Park Service does at these sites. And the Park Service, of course, as we all know, the historical staff is always evolving, right? Sometimes they do misstep, and sometimes they do have to make corrections. But of course, that's just natural. That's part of how we learn. That's part of how we evolve. And so I think we need to sort of keep these issues clear in our minds when we're evaluating the Park Service and what it is that they do.
Yeah. Now, you held this rally in order to raise awareness about the threats to the national park system and, battlefields in particular for us and our audience. What's the next step? What would you recommend folks do to kind of continue to think about this?
Look, I don't have any hard and fast solutions, Chris. I wish I did. I think it's important, and I think it'll sound cliche to again call your congressmen and women, write letters, emails. If you find yourself at a National Park Service site and you see one of those QR code stations, say something positive if you can about the Park Service. Show that you support them. Show that you understand and appreciate the mission that they're engaged in. These are not people who are looking to get rich. These are people who believe in a mission. They are serving all of us. And so I think anything that we can do at an individual level or as members of an organization to show our appreciation and support, I think goes a long way.
Great. Kevin, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to chat with us. Congratulations on the success of your event.
Thanks so much, Chris. Appreciate it.
I'm Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.